It's a new day dawning, the time is at hand, where the glory of the Lord will be revealed to every man. Open the door, open the door, open the door, and let the King of Glory in. Open the door.
All right. Open up the door. Starts right now. So fling wide, you heavenly gates, and prepare the way of the risen Lord. The Apostle John was on the island of Patmos. He was in prison for the testimony of Jesus Christ. And he heard a sound behind him. And he said, behold, I looked. There was a door standing open in heaven. I heard a voice which was like a trumpet speaking with me, saying, come up here and I will show you the things which must take place. That's what we need, my friends. We need a heavenly perspective of the things that are going on in the world around us, the things that the Word of God foretold us would come to pass, those things which must take place, those things which are taking place even now. That is what this broadcast is all about, discussing the issues of the day and discerning the times in which we live from a biblical perspective and worldview. Good afternoon, everybody, all across the fruited plain. Andy White here, and what you are about to hear is the fusion of heart, mind, and soul, and I am sending powers and principalities into frothy fits of frenzy simply by being here. And I'm so glad that you are here with me as well. Again, good afternoon, and hey, do me a favor if you are listening on Open Up the Doors on Facebook Live. I am streaming live on my Open Up the Doors Facebook page, and please join in over there on Facebook Live over at facebook.com/faithfm 91.7. That's facebook.com/faithfm 91.7. I gotta slow down my speech pattern here. I've been like just rushing all day, and such a busy day that I just got to reel it in. But hey, do me a favor and jump in on the conversation if you are there on Facebook Live, and please share it to your streams as well, and let people know about Open Up the Doors. Invite them to the broadcast. Invite them to like the page as well. You can also email me at ajwhite777@icloud.com. It's ajwhite777@icloud.com if you would like to correspond with me also. All right, so let's get to it. There's a lot of stuff here that I need to get to today, that I'd like to get to today, but very serious, very, very serious thing that I want to be informative to my audience. I see what people respond to on the internet. I see what people respond to off the Facebook, the Open Up the Doors Facebook page, and as I'm seeking the Lord about what to share and what to bring forth, really on a weekly basis. There's a lot of facets involved in that. Obviously, as what I'm feeling the Holy Spirit would lead me to share, and what's going on in the news as well. But there's something I want to touch upon just a little bit, because it's really not being, from what I'm gathering, very few people really are even aware of it. Very few people know that it's actually going on, because it really has not been reported at all in the American media, or very, very little, I really should say. But there's a horrible, horrible thing going on in Nigeria right now, and it's been going on for some time, but it's getting worse. And since the beginning of this year, since January of 2018, more than 6,000 Christians in Nigeria have been killed. The Christian church there is being horribly persecuted. There are some real horrible, horrible things going on there. And again, it's really not being reported that much. The majority of those 6,000 Christians massacred this year are mostly, this is horrific, mostly children and women and the aged. The details, when you do a Google search and you find a few of the stories, and there are just a few, but the details of the murder of these thousands of people, and they're often very grisly. In fact, one of the reports put out by Breitbart in Britain, the British version of Breitbart, there were pictures that I was looking through. In fact, at the top of the headline there, it says very graphic content. And I was looking at the pictures, and they're horrific. They really, really are horrific. Don't look at them for the sake of morbid curiosity. But if you look at them, you will be moved to tears. You will be moved with just sympathy and compassion and pity for that human beings can treat other human beings this way. It's always been extremely mind-boggling to me, being the person that I am naturally, and even more so in Christ. I've just never been able to understand how human beings can treat other human beings the way they do. But many of these people they're either being hacked to death, they're being beheaded with machetes, others are being burned alive. In fact, just a week or two ago, the Muslim jihadists locked the doors of a church and burnt the church down with people in it. Women are sexually assaulted and or raped before they're slaughtered. And here are some of the reports and headlines. I just want to read some headlines, but I want to emphasize something here. These are the reports and headlines that you will not see nor find in the American mainstream media. But here are just some headlines. Nigeria's Fulani jihadis grow deadlier than Boko Haram, killing hundreds of Christians in days. That was from Breitbart News in Britain just from the other day, this past week. Another headline. This is put out by a Christian ministry, Open Doors Ministry, which is a ministry for missionaries and for things that are going on in the missionary world. But this headline from Open Doors Ministries says a dozen Christian villages in Nigeria were wiped out in a 4-day killing spree. Another headline from CBN, one of the few, maybe the only American news sources. But can we consider, I said it's nowhere to be found in the mainstream media. I don't know if you can consider CBN, Christian Broadcasting Network, the 700 Club, part of the mainstream media. I wouldn't consider them. I mean, they're big. I understand that in the Christian world, but I wouldn't consider them part of the mainstream media. But their headline, and they had a video there interviewing this particular person, a human rights attorney, Emmanuel Ogebi. But their headline is, Children Murdered in Their Beds. These jihadists are just coming in and just slaughtering people. Children murdered in their beds. Nigeria, now the deadliest place to be a Christian. In fact, I want to quote from this guy, Emmanuel Ogebi. He lost some of his family, he found out recently. And to quote him from this news article, he says, Nigeria is now the deadliest place in the world to be a Christian. What we have is a genocide. They are trying to displace the Christians. They are trying to possess their land, and they are trying to impose their religion on the so-called infidels and pagans who they consider the Christians to be. And one more headline, which was really a column in a online magazine called the Gatestone Institute. And their column was titled, International Community Ignores Genocide of Christians in Nigeria. Why? And this is true. To be sure, because I don't like to say things, I don't make things up. I just don't do that. And I like to vet the things I read, I like to vet the things I'm saying. And as I've been saying that you're not going to find this anywhere in the American mainstream media, I put that to the test just last night. I decided I'm going to go over to CNN and just do a search for any news out of Nigeria. There was nothing. There was like one story about something going on that had nothing to do with this. And then I went over to MSNBC. Nothing. did a Google search. I mean, MSNBC. I don't want to go on a bunny trail. They're just insane over there. They really are. Those people have lost their minds. I do a search for Nigeria, and all I get pull up is 20 columns having to do with Trump being an idiot and Trump being stupid. And I mean, it was just anti-Trump. But I didn't even do a search for Trump. I did a search for Nigeria. I mean, I don't want to go down that bunny trail, but MSNBC, just like, it's the cesspool. But anyway, I did a Google search on MSNBC. I did a Google search on CNN. I did a Google search on Fox. Nothing. This stuff is not being reported. And I had something else I wanted to prepare for today, and I decided, you know what? I want to give this audience, because I respect it, information that they need. Information about things that are going on in this world that pertain to, I believe, the prophetic last days that we're in, but also the means to pray, because we need to remember our brothers and sisters who are being persecuted. I don't understand, like I just read this headline from the Gatestone Institute. International community ignores the genocide of Christians in Nigeria. And this situation and these headlines and these stories are simply nowhere to be found in the mainstream American media. Why do you suppose that is? I asked the question rhetorically. Why do you suppose that is? Various news outlets identify the Fulani as simply herdsmen. There was one New York Times article I came across talking about the fighting between the herdsmen and the farmers. But the New York Times completely dismissed and ignored in their article the religious connection. They completely ignored the jihadist Muslim source of the conflict, and simply referred to it as herdsmen ravaged by, according to the New York Times, ravaged by global warming, with Christian farmers who are accused of having instigated their demise by stealing the Muslim group's cattle. I mean, the New York Times article was pathetic. It was really pathetic, almost making it sound like they said, the Christians instigated it by stealing the Muslims' cattle, which I've read other places was totally not true. What they actually are doing, these Fulani jihadists, is what they are. But you know what they're doing? They're driving their cattle onto property owned by Christians because they want to run the Christians off their property. And then when they come across their cattle on the Christians' property, they blame the Christians for stealing the cattle. It's horrendous. And the New York Times and some others have simply tried to reduce this conflict, not the Islamic jihad that it is, but simply some herdsmen and farmers battling over land that's becoming scarce because of global warming, of all things. You can blame everything on global warming these days. However, what the New York Times described as simple herdsmen are equipped with AK-47s that everyone agrees, from what I've done my homework on this, everyone agrees that these simple herdsmen could not afford AK-47s because they're expensive. So where are they getting them from? No one seems to know where these simple herdsmen are getting these AK-47s from. Who's supplying the Fulani jihadists with AK-47s and other weapons to drive the Christians off their land and to drive them off the plateau? It's called the plateau region of Nigeria, which is kind of ground zero for the center of Christianity in Nigeria. But these simple Fulani herdsmen have become deadlier than Boko Haram, and most of us have heard of Boko Haram because of they kidnapped those 200 girls a few years ago, and there was a big silly Facebook and hashtag Save Me thing that was all symbolism over substance. So we know a lot about Boko Haram. Boko Haram pledged their allegiance to the ISIS caliphate, and a lot of these Muslim groups across North Africa have pledged their allegiance to ISIS, because, which I'll get into a little bit later, once there's a caliphate established, the Sharia law commands that you must pledge your allegiance to that caliphate. I'm actually going to touch upon that in a moment. But right now I want to just stick with, why is this being ignored the way it is? Both the Nigerian government and the U.S. government have long sought to present this protracted jihad in Nigeria as simply territorial clashes between the haves, who apparently are always the Christians, and the have-nots, who are apparently always the Muslims. But the Nigerian government and the international community are doing basically nothing to address this situation in Nigeria. In fact, they won't even acknowledge that its roots are coming from Islamic jihad. And we went through 8 years of that with the Obama administration, denying the reality of what's going on. However, local sources, those Christian bishops, those Christian leaders on the ground in Nigeria, are flatly saying, quote, this is a grand plan to Islamize Nigeria. Quote, the killings are becoming no longer herder and farmer clashes, but a, quote, deliberate attempt to conquer and occupy the land of the people's ancestral heritage, said Dr. Soja Bararang, who is a Christian leader who he also denounced there was an attack on a Bible school. See, there's an attack on a Bible school. What does that have to do with so-called farming land? As I said a moment ago, Plateau State is the epicenter of Christianity in Nigeria, and the Christians are being run off. And a spokesman for the National Christian Elders Forum, which is a leading organization, or a wing, I should say, of the Christian Association of Nigeria, said this, quote, it is clear to the Christian elders in Nigeria that jihad has been launched in Nigeria by the Islamists of northern Nigeria, led by the Fulani ethnic group. The Fulani are the herdsmen, they're called. This jihad is based on the doctrine of hate taught in mosques and Islamic madrasas in northern Nigeria, as well as the supremacist ideology of the Fulani. Using both conventional violent jihad and stealth civilization jihad, and I'm going to get into some of these in a moment. What is civilizational jihad? But this guy goes on to say, the Islamists of northern Nigeria seem determined to turn Nigeria into an Islamic sultanate, a caliphate, and replace liberal democracy with Sharia as the national ideology. Folks, I got to go to a break right now, but I wanted to touch upon this to inform my audience. There are some groups that are trying to reach out and help. These are true refugees, the Christians that are fleeing, the Christians that are being persecuted. And I know I've got several articles on my Open Up the Doors Facebook page where I got all of this information from. One of the articles put out by Open Doors Ministry, and if you go and read that article, on the bottom of the article they tell you how you can help if you want to send financial support, if you want to send financial help. You've got Open Doors Ministries there in Nigeria. Also, the CBN article is on my Facebook page as well. If you go and read and watch the video from CBN, the 700 Club, they will tell you what they are doing there to help the Christian refugees and the persecuted church there in Nigeria, if you want to help in a financial way. But Christians throughout the world and throughout the Mideast are being beheaded. We've been seeing this for years from the Islamists and from the ISIS jihadists. Churches are being burned down, and multitudes are being forced to flee their homes. And it's so sad that you see so little coverage of these things in the American media. And sadly, and because of that leads to the fact that my fear is that we American Christians aren't paying too much attention to it either, and probably because we're not hearing about it. But we need to. That's why I wanted to share this today. We need to raise our voices. If we can't help them financially, we at the very least, we need to pray for them. The scripture tells us to remember those who are in prison, to pray for those who are being persecuted for righteousness' sake. We need, folks, and I know this audience will do it, we need to remember the persecuted church around the world. And many of us, having said that, many of us need to get our heads out of the sand of the land of Disney. Because I want to tell you something. real persecution is coming to America as well. It is inevitable. But we have a God who is mighty to save. Stick around, folks. I'll be right back. Here's Laura's story with Mighty to Save. Our God is mighty to save. He is so mighty to save. He's conquered death, hell, and the grave. Laura's story. We all know that song, Mighty to Save. Welcome back. Andy White here. You are listening to Open Up the Doors here on Faith FM, WEGB 90.7 and 93.3 in Napeague, and WEGQ 91.7 in Quogue. Thank God we have a God who's mighty to save. And my heart is filled with so many emotions as I was doing a lot of research last night on the situation in Nigeria. Because, again, my heart, if you're just tuning in, if you missed the first block, I was sharing about the persecution of the Christians in Nigeria and what's going on over there that you're not hearing about in the mainstream media at all. But I want to keep this audience informed and on the cutting edge of what's going on. I saw a report, and I think many of us have heard this already, but I saw a report, I don't know, several months back, maybe it was, that stated that Christian persecution is the highest right now in the last several years, the last 2, 3, 4 years, that Christian persecution is the highest that it has been since the first century church. I mean, think about that. I mean, that to me is almost unfathomable, because we know what the persecution was like in that first century church. We also know that it was the blood of the martyrs and the blood of the saints that was the seed of the church. So, God has his plans and his purposes and all of these things. But to think that we are having more persecution since the first century church, it ought to really, in some ways, come as no surprise, my friends, because it is to be one of the signs of the last days of the return of Jesus. The Bible calls it the war on the saints. We read about it in Revelation 12 and 13. Revelation 12 talks about the dragon, Satan, who was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring. In Revelation 12, we know that dragon is Satan. We know that the woman is Israel. And it says that he went to make war with the rest of her offspring. And who are they? Who is the offspring of Israel? Those who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. We have been engaged in this warfare, of course, since the days of the garden. But that war is going to be intensified the closer we get, because the scripture says that war broke out in heaven, and Satan and his angels were cast out of heaven and thrown down to the earth, and he came down with wrath and rage because he knows his time is short. So we are engaged in this warfare. Revelation 13:7, speaking of the Antichrist, it says, it was granted to him, the Antichrist, to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And you see, I'm bringing that up because I want to look at the bigger picture, because these things that are happening in Nigeria are, of course, really just a part of the whole spiritual war that is going on. It's simply another front on the ever-increasing last days war on the saints. To put it in contemporary terms, it's a jihad on the saints. And that jihad is being implemented in several different ways, which I want to highlight right now. Because I have a question. As I've been doing this research and looking at some of these things that are going on there in northern Africa, as well as, of course, what's been happening for the past 7-8 years out of the Mideast, as Christians are being persecuted and slaughtered across North Africa, after the church was almost annihilated in the Middle East, and since it's the Muslims, hear me out here, since it's jihadists who are waging jihad against what they call the Christian West, you have to wonder, I think, why is the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of the so-called refugees and quote-unquote asylum seekers that are flying out of the Middle East and flying out of North Africa into Europe, why are they overwhelmingly Muslim? Selah? It's the Christians who were being persecuted and almost annihilated in some cases, not the Muslims. And furthermore, why aren't they migrating to other Muslim countries? Why are they going into Europe? Well, my friends, because it's all about al-Hijrah. Al-Hijrah. The entire continent of Europe is being inundated with refugees at a rate unprecedented in world history. This is not just a bunch of refugees, quote unquote. Oh, yes, some of them are, of course. But it's actually al-Hijrah. And for those who don't know, and I've covered this at times in the past, but as I said a moment ago, this audience is increasing. We've got new listeners, and even though I might cover some old ground today, for those of you who have been listening for a long time, bear with me, because we've got some other folks who are joining in now, and I want to get them up to snuff and up to speed about the things we've been talking about. And I think it's good to be reminded of these things as well. It's been some time since I've talked about some of these things. But Hijrah is the Islamic doctrine of creating large-scale mass migrations that essentially become invasions. Remember a moment ago, I quoted from that Christian leader in Nigeria where he talked about civilizational jihad. Well, this is how civilizational jihad happens. Part of it is through Hijrah. The Quran says in Surah 4, verse 100, quote, from the Quran, whoever emigrates for the cause of Allah will find on the earth many locations and abundance. And whoever leaves his home as an emigrant to Allah and his messenger, and then death overtakes him, his reward has already become incumbent upon Allah. You see, there are those jihadists who believe in the violence of jihad. If they die, they're martyrs and they get their 72 versions. But Muhammad is also saying if you die in the course of your immigration, you'll be considered a martyr as well, because you're immigrating for the cause of Allah. To emigrate for the cause of Allah in order to bring Islam to a land is considered in Islam to be a great deed, and it is a form of jihad. I've spoken in the past on several occasions, actually about a year ago. I can't believe how fast the time goes, but about a year ago, I shared how that Turkish President Erdogan has been seeding Europe with both Turkish and Syrian Muslim immigrants. Erdogan's flooding of Europe with refugees is part of the Quranic al-Hijrah, because it's part of his overall plan of eventually dominating not only the Mideast Islamic crescent, which is on his agenda, but also Europe as well, through a caliphate that he dreams of establishing. Now, will Erdogan succeed? That remains to be seen, of course. But there is no doubt that is his aspiration, and he is ambitiously trying to do it. I mean, I don't want to get into Erdogan so much right now. I'm planning another show to do an Erdogan update, since he was just, quote-unquote, reelected. He is now really clamped down on his power. He's going to be in power in Turkey for at least the next 5 years. I don't want to get into all that right now. But my point being right here is that for years he has been actively and admittedly and openly seeding Europe with both Turks and Syrians and Arabs, basically migrants, Islamic migrants. And if he should succeed, and if he does accomplish his dream of reestablishing the Ottoman Caliphate, the European Muslims will pledge allegiance to it, as I shared in the first block, because that is what Muslims must do according to the Quran and the Sharia. Erdogan is another one who seems to fly under the radar a lot in geopolitical circles. But this guy has got a plan, and he's been putting his plan into practice. There are hundreds of thousands of Turks and people who are allied with Erdogan who live in Europe now. Now listen, folks, this is the present situation. You've got millions of Muslims seeded into Europe like leaven, not wanting to assimilate into European culture, but rather demanding that Europe kowtows and bows to Islam. It's called dhimmitude. And we see this happening throughout Europe, and we've covered this before. But, it says in Revelation 13:3, and all the world marveled and followed the beast. How do you get Europe to follow the beast? Well, you Islamize it first, of course, of which it is almost there. Now, if you think, because I know some people struggle with this, but if you think the idea of an Islamic Antichrist being proclaimed, lauded, and applauded by the false prophet of Rome is far-fetched, think again. Now, I will grant you there are a lot of possible scenarios for the fulfillment of Revelation 13, 11, and 14, where it talks about the false prophet telling the world to follow after the beast. I am definitely not dogmatic on these things, but at the moment, I want to share some things with you, because the evidence seems to be that things seem to be taking shape along these lines. Just yesterday, I came across a column by Robert Spencer in his internet blog called Jihad Watch. Robert Spencer is he is an expert on Islam, and he writes on these issues all the time. That's why his magazine is called Jihad Watch. But just yesterday, he reported, you ready for this? Here was his headline. Italian bishop says he's ready to, quote, turn all the churches into mosques to aid the cause of mass Muslim migration. Now, about a year or so ago, I shared a lot about how this present Pope Francis, was embracing Islam. And I got a whole bunch of broadcasts on that you guys could look up. But listen to what this Italian bishop is saying. That he's ready to turn all the churches into mosques to aid the cause of mass Muslim migration. Monsignor Rafael Nogaro, Bishop Emeritus of Caserta, says he is ready to turn all, quote, he is ready to turn all the churches into mosques if it were useful to the cause. To the cause of what? Al-Hijrah? This guy is a Catholic bishop, and he wants to help the Muslims with the Hijrah. He says if it allowed us to save the lives of men and women. And so, writes Robert Spencer, the Catholic Church continues on its path of aiding and abetting Europe's civilizational and cultural suicide, not unwittingly, but with its eyes wide open. Al-Hijrah plus al-Walada equals Islamification. What's al-Walada? It's procreation. In other words, if you can't beat them with bullets, beat them with babies. Jihad al-Walada. Al-Walada means childbearing, and it's also another facet of jihad. It's seen as a way to contribute to the struggle to make Islam supreme. So therefore, I'm going somewhere with this, folks. Listen to me. When you bring in the dynamic of the fact that the Muslim birth rate is far, far, far outpacing the European birth rates, the full Islamization of Europe is only a matter of time. In fact, most statisticians and those who do demographics are saying that the full Islamization of Europe is probably only 20 to 30 years away. It was just over a year ago on this broadcast that I shared that the Pope himself was calling on European nations to integrate Muslim migrants into the continent and to intermarry with them and bear their children. I shared that on a broadcast a year ago called The Doctrine of Balaam. To quote the Pope from that broadcast, this integration is all the more necessary today since as a result of a selfish search for well-being, Europe is experiencing the grave problem of a declining birth rate. This is the Pope. And these statements are stunningly similar to those of a leading imam, I should say, whose name is Sheikh Muhammad Ayad, who preached a message at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem a couple of years ago. And he stated that Muslims should exploit the migrant crisis, the Al-Hijrah, to breed with Europeans and, quote, conquer their countries. Here's a quote from this imam's sermon at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. Quote, "We will give them," meaning Europe, "we will give them fertility, We will breed children with them, because we shall conquer their countries. Whether you like it or not, you Germans, Americans, French, and Italians, and all those akin to you, meaning the West, take in the refugees. Yes, take in the refugees. For soon we will call them and their European-born sons in the name of the coming caliphate. And we will say to you, these are our sons. Folks, these people have a plan, and they are implementing it. Last year, Turkish President Erdogan urged all Turks living in Europe to have at least 5 children, saying they are the future of the continent. Go live in better neighborhoods, he said. Drive the best cars, he said. Live in the best houses. Make not 3, but 5 children, because you are the future of Europe. Now, Europe is beginning to wake up in some quarters. But I am of the opinion that even though they are beginning to wake up and realize they have a problem, and they're making rhetoric about cracking down on the problem, but they're not actually doing anything about it. But either way, no matter what, I believe in Europe's case, I think it's come down to a question of it's too little too late. It's too little too late. A Pew Research study report finds that even, quote, if all migration into Europe were to immediately and permanently stop, which it has not, but if all migration into Europe were to immediately and permanently stop, still, due to the significantly higher Muslim birth rates, Europe's Muslim population will grow significantly to about 36 million, almost double the current population. Al-Hijra times Al-Waladi equals Islamization, my friends. Al-Walada, I should say. Al-Hijra plus Al-Walada equals Islamization. And this is what's going on. This is what they're doing. Make no mistake about it, my friends. From persecution to procreation, the jihad on the saints is a multi-front war, but we need to fight the good fight. Stick around. I'll be back in a moment. I got to take a mid-show break. I'm actually behind. But here's Creed with Fight the Good Fight. I'll be back. Stick around. The fusion of heart, mind, and soul. This is Open Up the Doors with Andy White here on Faith FM, WEGB 90.7 and 93.3 in Napeague, WEGQ 91.7 in Quag. And I just want to welcome everyone to this third block of this week's edition of Open Up the Doors. Hey, if you are just tuning in, you can catch me live on Facebook Live over at the Open Up the Doors Facebook page at facebook.com/FaithFM 91.7. Please join in on the conversation over there. Let me know where you are listening or watching from, more precisely, because if you go on Facebook Live, you'll be able to actually watch. And shoot me some comments and some questions about the subject matter that we've been talking about, and I'll try and address it if I can, if it's something I'm able to address. But I certainly do like to try and, cultivate some interactive community there on Facebook Live, even as I'm speaking over the FM airwaves. So anyway, we've been talking about what I would say the jihad on the saints. The Bible calls the war on the saints. And if you've missed the first 2 blocks, from persecution to procreation, there's different forms, different fronts on this war of jihad that's being implemented by the spirit of Antichrist. As I read earlier a moment ago in Revelation 12:17, and the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Yes, my friends, I'm running out of time. I can't believe how fast this hour goes, but the war on the saints has already begun. In fact, as you already know, it's been going on for centuries. It's been going on since the beginning of time, really. But no doubt, here's the point, really, for us in this day and age. No doubt it will be amplified and magnified during the tribulation. It's ramping up. The jihad on the saints is ramping up, my friends. And don't doubt for a moment that it's not already happening. The spirit of Antichrist has been and is actively waging an ever-increasing war against the saints. So having said that, and where do I want to go with this? And again, I want to share something I shared a moment ago, because I'm repeating some things that I've shared in the past, because the audience here is growing. And I do think it's good to be mindful of these things and to be reminded of these things. And since it's been a while since I've spoken on some of these things, that's why I want to bring them back into remembrance, because there has been a game plan that's been schemed out, and it's happening. It's happening. When you see a year ago the Pope talking about, encouraging Europe to intermarry with the Islamic migrants, with the Muslim migrants, and then just recently you have a bishop in Italy saying he's ready to turn all of the churches into mosques. I mean, what kind of a statement is that? I mean, just think about this. I mean, hello, a Catholic bishop? I mean, we're not even talking about like some lay person, some low level. What, a Catholic bishop saying he's ready to turn over all the churches into mosques to help with Hijrah? I mean, wow. I mean, what do I see coming? What do I see happening? I want to share some things, but I want to say this emphatically before I do, that this is purely hypothetical. Eschatology being what it is, and I've shared in the past, I don't like to speculate on things. This show isn't about speculation. But eschatology being what it is, sometimes you do have to speculate just a little based on the information you have as you line it up and align it with Scripture. So I do want to state emphatically that what I'm sharing here, I'm not dogmatic on, but it's what I see happening in this alignment. I see an Islamic Antichrist caliphate rising. I've spoken about it, the revived Ottoman Caliphate. The caliphate is the revived. In Revelation, it talks about a beast with 7 heads, and the 7th head is. And the 8th king was of the 7. There's this revival. And the Ottoman Empire was the last empire that ruled over the Middle East, that ruled over Jerusalem. The Ottoman Empire finally shut its doors back in I believe it was 1913 or sometime around there. 1918 maybe it was. But that empire, that Islamic empire, will be revived. We see that happening. We see all the nations surrounding Israel are Islamic nations. Satan waging war on the woman. So I see this Islamic Antichrist caliphate rising. I can also envision the papacy. I want to stress something here. I can envision the papacy. Because it's the Pope and some of the leaders that are embracing Islam. There's a lot of conservative bishops that are opposed to this. I've shared about that in the past. There is a lot of faithful Catholics who love Jesus, faithful Catholics who love the Lord. So I'm not impugning the Catholic Church as a whole, but I'm talking about an individual who in the Scripture in Revelation 13 rises as the false prophet, who rises as the mouthpiece for the beast. So I can envision the papacy as the false prophet that embraces the Islamic beast and causes all the world to follow after a type of Chrislam, so to speak. That is where I see this possibly going. And again, I want to stress possibly going based on what we're seeing on the ground, because this is what I see being potentially played out. Again, I'm not dogmatic on these things. I don't want people thinking, I am stating these things as this is that. No, I'm just saying this is a possible scenario based on the information we have and based on the alignment that I'm seeing. This is a scenario that is slowly being played out. So we need to watch. This is my point. We need to watch as watchmen on the walls. Time will tell, of course, how these things will all play out. But there can be no doubt, my friends, that many things are coming into a prophetic alignment. with the scriptures. And there is a prophetic positioning, as I like to call it, happening in these days. The one world religion. And I really don't like using that term, because that term is a misnomer. But that what's often called the one world religion isn't going to be spiritualism, as some have speculated, or occultism, or humanism, or even atheism. In fact, I don't even believe there's going to be an actual one world religion per se. But more accurately, now hear me carefully, because this is important. More accurately, there is going to be an imposed, or an attempt made to impose the religion of the Antichrist, which I firmly believe to be imperialistic political Islam, which we are, of course, already witnessing. Just take a look at how the liberal West is, in fact, embracing Islam. People aren't necessarily being outright converted to Islam. Many are, but no, I'm not saying that the West is going to be converted, but they're being seeded. And the birth rates of the Muslims are increasing, as I shared in the last block. But the left is taking and embracing a defensive posture of Islam. We've seen that. Many have bought into the false narrative of Islam being a religion of peace. But I can certainly envision the possible merging of the ecumenicalism of Romanism and the imperialism of Mohammedism, along with the deceived apostate Christian liberalism embracing apocalyptic Islam. You think that's crazy? You think that's too far-fetched? Let me read another quote from Pope Francis, from what they call an apostolic exhortation back in 2013. The Evangelii Gaudium, which I guess is Latin for the joy of the gospel. But the Pope wrote, he stated, "We must never forget that they, the Muslims, profess they hold the faith of Abraham, and together with us, they adore the one merciful God who will judge humanity on the last day." I shared this a moment ago, but according to census and demographic data, Muslims will exceed 50% of the world's population within a couple of decades, considering we even get that far. I hear the terminology so often of a creeping Sharia used quite frequently, but I want to tell you what the world is creeping towards to, my friends. It's the kingdom of the beast, where all the world will wonder and follow after the beast. And while much of the church is being misdirected into looking for some mythical new one world religion to pop up, the actual Antichrist religious system is already on the scene and gaining in strength. And the deceived left is already aligning itself in simpatico with the socio-political system of the beast. And my friends, the West had better wake up, though I have no reason to believe that they will, because all these things must come to pass. The kingdom of the beast will rise, for so it is written. The jihad on the saints will intensify. But fret not, beloved. Fret not. Hold on to the word of your testimony. Because remember what it says in Revelation 12. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. And they did not love their lives to the death. Folks, it's only granted that these things that are going to happen, they're only going to occur for a short time. Jesus said that those days would be cut short for the sake of the elect. And then he, whose right it is to rule, will destroy them with the brightness of his coming. We have a great, great hope, my friends, and we win. I read the back of the book. We win. Even so, come Lord Jesus. I'm out of time. Thanks for joining in, folks, to another edition of Open Up the Doors. But keep it right here on Faith FM, because there's some great and continuing Christian programming coming up. God bless you, everybody. I appreciate and love you all. Tune in again next week at 3 o'clock for Open Up the Doors. And go to church on Sunday.